Hi everyone, welcome to Be Like Christ. Welcome to our 5-minute Bible study series. Today we are talking about Psalm 104. It's a free PDF that you can download. It's on the screen right now, but you can download it on our website. And there's a link down in the description to get it if you want it. So Psalm 104, it seems like kind of a follow-up to the last chapter. As far as the author is not stated, but many people attribute it to David because Psalm 104 begins in a very similar way to the way that Psalm 103 starts. We do have a New Testament reference today, and that is Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 7, where the Hebrews writer quotes from this psalm talking about God and Jesus and the angels. Themes for today: first one, God's power displayed in the creation of the universe, and the second one, God's magnificence displayed in his daily sustaining of the earth. And then we've got an interesting word to define, one that we talked about back in Psalm 74, and that's Leviathan. Leviathan is the name of a beast, a creature that once walked or swam on the earth. Leviathan's mentioned in verse 26. Leviathan is a mighty creature, likely now extinct. We don't know that for sure, but described in detail in Job chapter 41. So if you have time to look that up and read about Leviathan, that's definitely a very interesting chapter to read. It was a powerful scaled creature that was untamable by men, and it was unkillable by human weapons. Now, there's been a lot of theories about this. Seems to me that Leviathan probably is what we would classify as a dinosaur. So for today's outline, I've broken this chapter down into two different sections. The first one is verses 1 through 9, God, the great creator. So the first part of Psalm 104 is a contemplation on the greatness of God and his impressiveness that's displayed in the creation of the universe and in his creation of the world. The psalmist describes God as being clothed in splendor and riding the clouds like a chariot that's carried along by the wind. In verse 4, the psalmist writes, quote, "He makes the winds his messengers, flaming fire his ministers." That's the New American Standard version of that verse. God can employ every element of the natural world to do his will. All of them are his servants. And it's actually this verse that we just read that's quoted in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 7. So next, the wonders of the earth, the geological features of the earth, are brought to mind to cause the reader to marvel at God's creative power. God set the earth on its foundations, is what he writes. He separated the dry land from the oceans. He caused the mountains to rise up and the valleys to depress during this creation process. And of course, you can read about the creation of the world in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. This brings us to section number 2 in verses 10 through 35, God, the providential caretaker of the earth. So the creation event wasn't the end of God's observable work on the earth. God was also, and still is, the sustainer of all life on the earth, and he was to be admired for that work of sustaining. God gave life to the earth in part by providing the earth with water so that these living things could grow and be nourished. This water allowed the trees to bear fruit, allowed livestock to grow because the grass was growing, the livestock had something to eat, and it also allowed other plants to grow, all of which provided food and drink to mankind. God's work was also to be seen in the fact that he made homes for all the different animals that he created. For the goats, he made the mountains to live in. For the birds, the trees, and for the badgers, the rocks. And he also made the ocean, of course, for the fish. He made the oceans for innumerable species of life. And one of the varieties of life that's mentioned in chapter 104 is the Leviathan. Speaking of all of these animals, the writer says, "These all look to you to give their food in due season," in verse 27. And the author also says that it's God who decides when life begins, and it's God who decides when it ends. God's Spirit gives life to everything that he creates, and if he chooses and decides that it's time for something to die, then he can take life. God also made the sun and the moon, which govern the day and the night, which obviously affects all of these animals and the way they behave and the world that they live in. And so all of God's incredible creatures and the ecosystems in which they lived are a testament to God's wisdom and his power. And that's really what this psalm is about. The psalmist concludes saying that he's going to rejoice in the Lord and sing praises to him every day of his life. And so that is our 5-minute summary of Psalm 104. Let's do our application before we end today. Take time, if you have a chance, to review all of the animals and all the ecosystems that exist in the world. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do them all because there's so many. But take some time to think about these things, or maybe even look some of these things up online or in a textbook or somewhere like that. Admire their beauty, admire their functionality, admire their complexity. Not many of us bother studying things like biology or ecology or chemistry or anatomy after our years of formal childhood education. But reminding ourselves of just how incredible our world is a great way to build faith. And I think we see the psalmist. The psalmist clearly, he spent some time thinking about how the world worked, how the world was nourished, how it was sustained, how it got there in the first place, right? And that led him to God, and it led him to worship God. This would be a good thing for us to do as well. Take some time to do that. And I think when we do, we'll realize that the only reasonable explanation for the complexity of this world that we're living in, and even of ourselves, in our human body, is a magnificent God who is quote, clothed with splendor and majesty. If you're familiar with biology or anatomy, when you study and understand what's being proposed as a solution for the creation of the universe by these secular scientists, if you know just how complex, just how beautiful these systems are, I think you'll very quickly realize that their theories are insufficient to explain the real world that's all around us.